Yo, Bolts Nation, everything dropped today, and it was a whole lot. There was an offensive addition with instant impact potential, a rumor that could shake up the line, a move that completely scrambles a roster battle, and even a draft scenario that's starting to reveal what this team might really look like in 2026. Curious. And look, there's one move here that seems small on the surface, but it could change a lot once the season kicks off. So here's the big question. Is this front office finally building a more complete team around Justin Herbert, or are there still major pieces missing? Excited? Smash that like button, subscribe, and roll with me, because this story is just heating up. Everybody sees the Keaton Mitchell signing and thinks the same thing right away. Depth. But it's bigger than that. In reality, this move could matter way more than people think, because it adds something this offense simply didn't have in this exact form. Real speed, sudden burst. The kind of juice that can turn an ordinary touch into a 20 or 30-yard lightning strike. And in a scheme that wants to stretch a defense horizontally before hitting it over the top, that matters. A lot. This is not just another running back walking into the room. This is the kind of piece that changes how a defense has to line up and react before the ball is even snapped. Mitchell arrives after showing he can be highly efficient on limited touches, and that's what really jumps off the page. He didn't need a massive workload to make things happen. When he got chances, he turned them into yards, first downs, and explosive moments. That matters because this backfield already has different types of runners. Omar Hamptoon brings power and physicality. Kimani Vidal brings energy, versatility, and rotation value. Mitchell walks in as the guy who can make a defense panic. One cut, one crease, and boom, the whole play flips. And I'm not gonna lie, putting that kind of weapon next to Herbert opens up some dangerous possibilities. But this is where the real conflict starts. Because when a player like this shows up, somebody feels it. And in this case, the spotlight starts shifting toward Dare Eus Davis. For good reason. If Mitchell shows up in training camp with that same track speed and proves he can handle return duties too, then the math gets simple and brutal. The team could end up carrying a player who gives them more on offense and threatens to take over on special teams too. Suddenly, this stops being a conversation about raw talent and becomes a conversation about roster value. Who gives you more in two phases of the game? Who actually earns that spot when the final cuts hit? That's the kind of battle that splits a fan base right down the middle. Some people will say Davis still deserves time, that speed doesn't just disappear overnight, that the right system could bring back what looked lost. Others are going to hammer the productivity argument and say the NFL waits for nobody. If you were the GM, what would you do? Keep betting on Davis bouncing back, or clear the runway for Mitchell to take over that hybrid role for good? And here's the crazy part. If Mitchell really becomes a backfield weapon and a legit return option, the ripple effect doesn't stop with him. It changes the rotation. It changes roster priorities. It even changes the pressure on other incomplete spots. And that's exactly why the next possible move suddenly feels even bigger. There's a comparison here that makes this story even more interesting. When a team enters the offseason with a lot of cap space and not much room for mistakes, the temptation is obvious. Go chase flashy names, win headlines, and sell the idea that you're being aggressive. But what the Chargers seem to be doing feels different. Less flash, more structure, less headline chasing, more January football. And that's why the possibility of Wyatt Teller hitting the market deserves way more attention than it's getting right now. Because let's be real, this offensive line still isn't finished. There's a foundation, sure. Rashawn Slater, Joe Alt, and Ty A.H. Dosh give them a respectable core. Trey Pipkins is back. Trevor Penning is in the mix. Cole Strange adds competition. But having bodies is not the same thing as having true confidence that the guard position can survive 17 games without sinking the offense in big moments. That's the pressure point. And those are the little details that separate a real playoff team from a roster that only looks dangerous on paper. Wyatt Teller is not peak Wyatt Teller anymore. And that has to be said honestly. He's going to turn 32, he's lost some mobility, and he's coming off a season that was solid, not dominant. He's had injury issues too. Nobody is calling him a savior. But that's not the real question anyway. The real question is much simpler. Is he better, more reliable, and more ready right now than what the Chargers currently have as an immediate answer? And that's where this gets really interesting. Because when you compare his recent play to what this team has gotten at right guard, the conversation changes. He doesn't need to be perfect. He needs to be functional. He needs to keep Justin Herbert from getting collapsed on from the inside. He needs to keep the front office from entering the draft desperate, reaching for a guard earlier than they should just because they let another playable veteran slip away. That's the kind of mistake that wrecks a board, wrecks the value, and starts bending the whole plan out of shape. Does that get you fired up, or does it make you nervous? If this breakdown makes sense to you, smash that like button and subscribe. This community has to keep growing together. And now drop a comment. Which of these stories hit you the hardest? And here's the part nobody can ignore. If Teller comes in at a reasonable price and doesn't mess with the compensatory pick formula, the value becomes way too good to pass up. It's the kind of low glamour signing that protects everything else. It protects Herbert. It protects the run game. It protects the draft. And when a quiet move starts carrying that much weight, you realize the next story also changes the entire shape of this offense. Now here's something that sounds contradictory, but makes total sense when you really study this backfield. The Keaton Mitchell addition isn't just good news for the offense, it's also a loud message to anybody expecting continuity. On paper, adding more speed, more burst, and more variation to the run game looks like a natural upgrade. But in reality, moves like this also close doors. And the door that looks like it's closing here is the one for Najee Harris. From a schematic standpoint, it's easy to see why this fit is attractive. This offense wants defenses running sideways, hesitating for half a second, and losing their angle in that tiny moment of doubt. Mitchell gives them exactly that kind of threat. He can attack the edge, explode through space, and change the geometry of the field. With Hampton bringing power and Vidal helping round out the rotation with energy, this starts looking like a backfield with very clear roles. It's not just about numbers, it's about complementary skill sets. And inside a well-designed system, that can be flat out nasty. Now comes the uncomfortable part. When you look at Najee Harris, you see a player who had awful luck, and that matters. The eye injury before training camp already threw everything off. Then came the Achilles tear, and that pretty much ended his season before the story ever had a chance to get going. That carries weight, it changes evaluations, it messes with rhythm, confidence, and market value. But the NFL usually does not leave much room for emotional narratives. It demands fit, availability, and immediate juice. And that's where the dilemma shows up. Do you value the resume of a player who has posted 4 1,000-yard seasons? Or do you fully embrace the idea that this offense has to get lighter, faster, and more unpredictable? Both arguments make sense. You can say Harris, if healthy, would still have value in short yardage and physical situations. But you can also look at this new setup and say the team has clearly chosen a different direction. If you were the GM, what would you do? Leave the door cracked open for Harris, or move on completely and never look back? And the strongest part of this whole thing is that it's not just about one player. It shows the identity this offense may be building toward: more speed, more specialization, less attachment to the past. And when you connect that to the next possible move hanging over this team, it starts to feel like the 2026 blueprint is becoming a whole lot clearer. Everything starts connecting when that mock draft enters the conversation. By itself, trading down from 22 to 28 might look like simple value management. But in the bigger picture, it reveals something much larger about how the Chargers may be building this roster. This wouldn't just be about chasing pure talent. It would be about volume, fit, and patching real holes on a team that already has a competitive base, but still needs more strength in the middle to survive a long run in 2026. And that's the most fascinating part. The 3 earlier moves almost set the table for this exact kind of draft approach. The logic is obvious. If the team adds speed to the backfield, starts redesigning the offense around Herbert, and still looks for veteran stability on the line, then the draft stops being a desperate scramble for instant fixes and becomes a chance to stack complementary pieces. The projection with Caden McDonald, Jalen Farmer, Genesis Smith, and Connor Liu tells that story perfectly. This is not a glamour draft. It's a draft built to harden the team from the inside out, improve protection, strengthen the run defense, and add a coverage defender who can erase mistakes on the back end. That raises the ceiling of the roster in ways that won't always show up in the headlines. Caden McDonald, for example, wouldn't be the pick that sells jerseys on day one. He'd be the pick that changes life for the linebackers and makes the entire defensive front better. Jalen Farmer would bring the kind of physical profile that could compete for snaps early on a line that still has question marks. Genesis Smith would add range and coverage, which could free up more aggression from the defenders in front of him. Connor Liu, if healthy, would be another smart investment in the interior. And that's where all of this ties together. Because when a team adds explosiveness on offense, looks for security and protection, and then uses the draft to reinforce the trenches and overall depth, the message becomes crystal clear. The Chargers want a roster that is less fragile, less dependent on patchwork solutions, and more ready for January football. That's the kind of vision that divides people. Some fans want the star, they want the flashy pick, the headline name, the instant jolt of hype. Others will look at this and say, this is exactly how a real contender behaves, by stacking strength at the positions that win playoff games. So, what's the bigger priority? A splashy name or a deeper, more complete roster? And that's the twist right there. None of these moves alone looks like the one that changes everything, but together they start sketching out the true identity of this team. And once that picture starts coming into focus, the conversation stops being about an active offseason and starts becoming about how far this group can really go. At the end of the day, all four of these stories are pointing in the same direction. The Chargers are trying to get faster in the backfield, more reliable in pass protection, more decisive with roster construction, and more physical in how they build for the future. Keaton Mitchell shakes up the rotation and the special teams picture. Wyatt Teller looks like the practical move to avoid making a mistake in the draft. Najee Harris fading out of the picture signals a real change in identity. And that mock draft points toward a more complete team in the trenches. Bolts Nation, there's real reason for hope here. The question is simple. Can this plan turn the Chargers into a true contender?